The military takeover of Pulau Tekong. The transformation of Pulau Tekong occurred in the 1990s, when Singapore's government systematically converted this 24-square-kilometer island from a thriving civilian community into a restricted military training facility. The island, once home to established fishing villages, schools, and families who had lived there for generations, was completely evacuated to make way for Singapore Armed Forces operations. The relocation process was ruthless. On the night of the final evacuation, residents were required to abandon their ancestral homes by midnight. This forced displacement affected approximately 2,000 former residents from over 500 families, disrupting community networks that had existed for decades and creating ghost villages across the island. The government cited national security and expanded military training needs as justification, but the speed of evacuation left little time for community consultation. Entire families lost their connection to traditional fishing grounds, ancestral burial sites, and community gathering places that had defined their identity for generations. Today, Pulau Tekong serves as Singapore's primary military training island, where all male citizens complete national service. The island remains completely off-limits to civilians, with certain areas systematically blurred from Google Maps due to classified military installations. The transformation represents one of Singapore's most complete community relocations, with lasting cultural wounds that continue to affect displaced families decades later. The Keppel Harbour ship breaking crisis. The Keppel Harbour ship graveyard developed over several decades, becoming one of Southeast Asia's most significant maritime waste challenges. The crisis began in the 1980s, when hundreds of decommissioned vessels from around the world were brought to Singapore's harbor for dismantling. However, international shipping companies found it more economical to simply abandon their vessels rather than pay for proper disposal. These abandoned ships included massive cargo vessels, oil tankers, and military ships that created floating graveyards across multiple maritime zones. Complex dismantling procedures requiring safe removal of asbestos, fuel, and hazardous materials were expensive, so companies often transferred ownership to shell companies or declared bankruptcy to avoid responsibility. The environmental impact became catastrophic, as hundreds of vessels leaked fuel, oil, and chemicals into harbor waters, contaminating coral reefs and creating dead zones where marine life could no longer survive. The contamination affected several square kilometers of ocean floor where diverse marine ecosystems once flourished. Out of approximately 500 abandoned vessels that accumulated over the decades, only a small fraction undergoes proper recycling annually due to high costs and complex procedures. The harbor now resembles a post-apocalyptic seascape in certain zones, with rusting hulks altering underwater currents and marine navigation patterns. The cleanup represents one of Southeast Asia's most complex environmental remediation projects. The Bukit Brown Cemetery Heritage Crisis. Singapore's largest Chinese cemetery crisis began following Bukit Brown's closure in 1973, when this 233-hectare burial ground, containing over 100,000 graves, was systematically neglected, creating one of the nation's most significant cultural heritage disasters. Before abandonment, Bukit Brown wasn't just a cemetery, but a cultural landscape representing Singapore's Chinese immigrant history. Established in 1922, it became the final resting place for Singapore's pioneer generation, featuring elaborate traditional Chinese tomb architecture and feng shui burial arrangements that served as gathering places for ancestral worship. After the government implemented restrictive access laws prohibiting new burials and family maintenance, tropical vegetation began consuming grave sites systematically. Ancient trees grew through graves, while vines made areas completely inaccessible, with traditional tomb architecture disappearing beneath jungle growth. The crisis intensified in 2011 when the government announced plans to build roads through parts of the cemetery for housing developments. This sparked heated debates about development versus preservation, with heritage groups arguing that disturbing ancestral graves violated fundamental Chinese cultural values. The abandonment severed family lineages from ancestral connections, forced separation from traditional worship practices, and caused systematic destruction of genealogical records maintained for generations. By the time preservation efforts gained momentum, Approximately two-thirds of Singapore's founding generation graves had been consumed by dense jungle. Today, a compromise preserves parts of Bukit Brown while allowing development elsewhere. But heritage advocates argue the damage represents one of the most heartbreaking examples of cultural heritage destruction in Singapore's rapid development history. The Labrador Nature Reserve's geological mystery. The Labrador Nature Reserve contains Singapore's most unexplained natural anomaly. Bizarre rock formations resembling lunar landscapes began appearing in satellite imagery during the 1990s. These unusual white and gray structures create crater-like depressions and geometric patterns, completely unlike Singapore's typical tropical environment. Geological surveys revealed formations displaying characteristics inconsistent with Singapore's known geological history, featuring barren terrain with alien rock compositions that create stark contrasts with surrounding rainforest vegetation. Scientists have never conclusively determined the origins of these mineral deposits and geometric stone arrangements. Historical research revealed extensive World War II military use, including underground bunkers and tunnel networks built by British colonial and Japanese forces. However, the connection between wartime construction and current geological formations remains unclear. The formations include perfectly circular depressions appearing artificially created, underground cavity systems suggesting extensive subsurface engineering, and mineral deposits creating surreal visual effects. Visitors frequently report disorienting experiences, with many describing feeling transported to an alien world due to the landscape's complete disconnection from familiar tropical surroundings. Approximately 10 hectares of terrain resembling extraterrestrial surfaces exist within Singapore's borders, with geometric patterns visible in aerial photography continuing to puzzle geologists and attract curious visitors to Singapore's most otherworldly landscape. The digital privacy and mapping restrictions. Singapore maintains one of Southeast Asia's most systematic approaches to controlling public access to sensitive geographical information through comprehensive digital mapping restrictions. Government agencies coordinate with major platforms like Google Earth to systematically black out or blur dozens of sensitive locations across the island. The restrictions cover military research centers, intelligence headquarters, diplomatic facilities, and strategic infrastructure considered essential to national security. This creates digitally invisible zones throughout Singapore's urban landscape that citizens cannot examine through publicly available mapping services. The program has increased citizen curiosity about hidden government operations, with online communities dedicated to identifying censored zones and documenting restricted areas. The censorship raises questions about balancing national security with public access to basic geographical information about their own country. Approximately 50 separate locations have been digitally erased from public satellite imagery across Singapore's 728 square kilometers, with specialized government departments maintaining ongoing censorship of classified facilities. The Haw Par Villa Cultural Preservation Project. The Haw Par Villa Cultural Preservation Project began in 1937 when Tiger Bomb fortunaires Boon Haw and Boon Par created Singapore's most comprehensive and psychologically challenging repository of traditional Chinese moral education. They built over 1,000 statues and dioramas depicting Chinese mythology, folklore, and moral teachings. The most famous section, the 10 Courts of Hell, presents detailed depictions of punishments for various sins according to Chinese Buddhist and Taoist beliefs. These graphic installations authentically represent traditional Chinese moral education methods that used fear-based imagery to teach proper behavior, including detailed sculptures depicting consequences for moral transgressions. The park serves as both tourist attraction and cultural preservation site, maintaining traditional Chinese educational approaches that might otherwise be lost to modernization. While contemporary visitors often find the graphic content disturbing, cultural historians defend its value as authentic preservation of traditional moral instruction techniques fundamental to Chinese community life. The 8-hectare installation represents one of the world's most complete repositories of traditional Chinese moral instruction preserved in physical form, serving as a bridge between traditional values and modern Singapore society. These stories illustrate the complex challenges facing Singapore as it balances modernization, security, cultural preservation, and community needs. From military land acquisition to environmental disasters, from heritage debates to cultural preservation, these hidden aspects demonstrate the difficult choices between competing interests. Development versus preservation, security versus transparency, modernization versus cultural continuity. Each situation shows how Singapore's transformation from colonial port to modern city-state required difficult decisions with lasting consequences that continue to influence the nation's development.